Welcome everyone to another episode of People of Penang. Today we have somebody really special here. James Michael Gibby.
Oh,
He's also
Or
got
usually known as Mike Gibby. Mike was an educator in Singapore and he is a prolific, without exaggeration, author of fine history books in Penang. I think you're up to 9 now, right, Mike?
number 10 is in the works.
Oh, number 10 is in the works.
Yeah.
Welcome to the show.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I mean, I loved how we started off with the podcast with a little bit of just random chatter, and I really got an in-depth insight to who you are as an individual, and it does seem that you got into a key point in your life serendipitously, which is we were talking about how wonderful that is in general. So, in your current body of work, was it similar where you kind of fell into it serendipitously and you're like, c'est la vie?
Yeah, it was actually. What happened was I was working in Singapore, and Singapore is a wonderful place, providing you can escape from it from time to time and just and breathe.
You should launch pad to the tropics.
Yeah, and so one December, in that kind of little dip between Christmas and New Year, there's a kind of a quiet spell there. I was canoeing with some friends near Mersing, and we camped out on this deserted little island, and we canoed around it just to see what it was. And there was this amazing scenery. It was just stunning. I'd never seen anything like it before. Huge red cliffs, all in columns. It's the only place in Malaysia and one of the few places in the world where it exists. It's just kind of stunning stuff. And I thought, naturally you think, that's terrific. And at the end of our little trip, we went back to the fishing village, and one of the local guys came up and said, you're here about the destroyer, aren't you?
What?
That's so mysterious.
Pardon? And he said, yeah, there was a group of old Brits, and I thought, thank you very much. There was a group of old Brits here about a week ago who were survivors of a destroyer that was sunk in the Second World War.
Oh my God.
And the ship is just out there by that island. And I thought, cliffs, sunken destroyer, Second World War. I'm going to write a magazine article about this. And what happened next was I thought, you can't write an article about just one island. So let's do a couple more islands. And I fell into this pattern of describing how the place is now and then some aspect of its history. And it's amazing. I later would discover that every island in Malaysia has got this interesting, different, quirky, unique history. So it all began December, I think it was 1990, and it was going to be an article, and then it became a book. And then one terrible personal problem I have is as I come towards the end of a project, and in this case, at the end of writing that book, I was thinking, what on earth am I going to do next?
Oh, wow.
There's this, just like a kind of if you watch waves on the seashore, you see a wave building and then breaking, and then there's another one coming. And I thought, what on earth am I going to do next? Because it's been such fun. You go to the islands, you meet the people, they tell you about legends and myths and whatever, and you go to the old books and you find all kinds of interesting information, and it's just addictive. So that's how the whole book thing began 34 years ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
Was that your
So-
first foray?
Yeah, that was that was my first book. So you might say only 10 books in 34 years? That's not many. Come on.
That averaging.
You can do
The
better
last few
than
years,
that.
he's been knocking
You
out
can
one
do
a
better
year.
than that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
No, but that's an amazing way of getting into it, though. I mean, I didn't expect the story to be quite on that level, because the moment you said destroyer, I perked up. I thought it was along the lines of every boring person. Like, I just woke up one day, somebody offered me a job, and I clocked in at 8. You know.
Was it? I'm curious. Do you get to the bottom of it? Was it the Prince of Wales or Repulse? Or
Get to the
something?
bottom
No,
of the
no,
destroyer.
it was a destroyer. It was on its way to meet Prince of Wales and Repulse.
Oh wow.
And it bumped into 3 Japanese destroyers and foolishly attacked. And they promptly sank it.
Yes.
And the survivors made it to this little fishing village, and that's how it all began.
Wow. Considering that the Japanese has more of a defensive thing, it's kind of like, whose fault is it?
For our
The guy who's meant to be
They
listeners,
attacked us. They attacked
we're
us.
wondering what we are talking about. The Prince of Wales and Repulse are 2 super powerful British
Battleships,
flagships,
Yeah.
but they couldn't defend against
Yeah.
kamikaze attacks. It was just sunk.
Yes.
They had no air defenses.
yes.
Yeah. Mm.
Yeah, but that's kind of a funny thing where certain places, history could be appreciated or not, and it takes a certain individual to come in. Like for example, right? If people just saw this destroyer as just a ship, would it be given the same importance? Just like how some archaeological sites and stuff like that. So in your opinion, right, like what makes something interesting, both being equal in ancientness and information, is it the fad, the fervor, the like, oh my God, there's a pyramid versus that thing?
I think there are different answers to that. Something may be not particularly interesting unless the way you get there makes it interesting. I was once talking to someone who was very sedentary. They were not interested in exercise at all. They just didn't see the point of it. And I was saying to them, you should come out and try climbing some mountains, because when you get to the top, the view is stunning. You feel something in your chest go like this. And they said, yeah, but I could helicopter to the top of the mountain and I would see exactly the same thing. And I said, that's exactly where you're wrong, because it's the journey which gives it significance. Yeah. So sometimes when you're doing research, you're trying to find out who did something, or why did they do it, or when and where did they do it. And initially, you try this, you try that. I'm sure you know what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And sometimes you think, no, it can't have been that. And then eventually, inshallah, you find the answer, and you think, yes. And the feeling you get is just kind of a happiness that you've achieved something. And then, of course, the next thing is you want to say to someone, hey, do you know what I discovered? This is really interesting. And they say, why is it interesting?
Wow. No, well, I think that.
Yeah, Mike, to digress a little bit, I mean, you're a scientist too.
Okay.
I was into science too, in trained scientific mind. Don't you think it has parallels with the, inquiry in science? It's like,
Yeah, sure.
most, the greatest findings are not eureka. It's like, that's funny.
Yeah.
And then it leads you down that rabbit hole.
Right. Yeah, rabbit holes are everywhere if you're not careful. But it's the kind of realization, isn't it? The flower opens. You realize that you have found what you were looking for.
So does it go back to the whole idea that, how people complain about some schools teaching history just by, like a list, like a laundry list of things to memorize.
Dates.
And that's not the best way to appreciate history or archaeology or geography in general, because I love what you said. Like, it's how it got there that makes it the most interesting. And if you just remember the dates, all you just remember are the dates, but not the context of
Exactly.
What Mike's doing is a thing called local history. It's different from political history that it's usually taught in everywhere. It's very broad and not quite specific. It's about political figures. This is really local history. You really drill down. He even reads people's diaries.
Well,
I have questions.
for me, the starting point is people, because people are interesting. When I was a teacher back in the day, I used to think, or I used to say, you can teach kids anything, but first you have to get their interest. You have to show them why something is interesting, and then whoosh, you're away. People and how they react to situations, that's what other people find interesting. Why did you do that? Yeah. So the book that Eugene is talking about there, about 5 or 6 years ago, I stumbled on this guy called Dr. King, who lived here in Penang in the 1850s. And in one sense, he was a very dull person. He was a good doctor, yes, but he was painfully shy and a bit rude.
Oh, wow.
So nobody liked him except maybe one or two people who were also rude and shy, and they hung out together. Okay.
Not to mention he had pliers.
But
what?
but where he becomes interesting is at that time there was a ship which left here every 2 weeks carrying mail, carrying letters home to UK. So every 2 weeks, the Dr. King, he would write 2 letters, one to his mother, my dear mama, and one to father, my dear papa. And for I think it was about 11 years, he wrote 2 letters every fortnight back to UK. And the amazing, which is kind of okay, so what? The amazing thing is that his parents kept all those letters, and you can read them today. And yes, he was painfully shy, and yes, he was rude, but this was wonderful because it meant he had lots of time at home by himself. And he wrote these terrific letters, being rude about people, or describing what he was doing, and so we have 11 years of him describing Penang then, and then what you do is you discover the local vicar of the church. What do you know? He was a friend of King, and he wrote a diary as well.
Oh, wow.
Now, I'm not saying the vicar was rude and shy. He was a different character altogether. He was a really nice guy. And King's wife wrote a diary. The local judge wrote poetry about people in Penang. And then you have all the local newspapers. And, suddenly, whoosh, you're in this world, this kind of virtual world, populated by real people interacting. And you can read in the diary of one of them saying, I met so-and-so today, and check the other diary. Yeah, there it is.
Oh, wow.
I went out riding my horse in the early morning and encountered... And, it all just kind of... boom, comes together. Amazing.
I think there's something in there that might interest you, because you did a walk on the Penang riots. Right?
Yeah.
Yep.
One
so
of my
in
favorite
there,
topics.
the wife of
Right.
the wife was
Joanna.
Joanna was totally calm about it. They were not really concerned.
Yeah.
Why were they totally calm about it?
Because it's a fight between those groups of people, not them.
Well, why? That's a great question, actually. Why was Joanna? This is incredible, isn't it?
Yes.
We're talking about this totally unimportant person, Joanna, but she's interesting.
Yes.
Why was Joanna not afraid during the Penang riots? It's because her father was a sea captain, and he went everywhere. Sailed to Europe. He sailed all around the world. And if you grow up and your father is a captain, That's someone who has assurance. They're used to command.
Right.
And, if you're a little girl growing up, that's my daddy.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's really interesting, actually, because the judge that I mentioned, who wrote rude poems about people, when King and Joanna married, what was his wedding present for Joanna? It was a riding saddle. So, it wasn't plates or silver or something. I think it was a sneaky joke.
But riding.
He gave Joanna a riding saddle.
Is that how people were cheeky back in the days?
That's how. Yeah, you were subtle in those
Oh,
days.
wow.
Victorian subtlety.
Yeah.
It's like, I will get you a riding saddle for the wedding night.
Yeah.
For our listeners here, the Penang riots is not very recent. It's in the 1860s. Colonel Anson,
all the old 60s.
Anson Road, Colonel Anson, Telur Anson. He was the lieutenant governor. He just got the job, and all hell broke loose between the secret societies, Chinese secret societies, and strangely, it involves a group of Muslims too.
Well, that's a funny thing. So suddenly I perked up. No, that's very interesting because, the commissioner's report, states that it was a Malay person throwing a rambutan skin to a Chinese person. But I was starting to think that things like that don't normally cause big riots on that level. So I've always been of the mind that it was probably more to do with the opium.
To be clear, it wasn't Malays against Chinese. It was a group of Malays with Chinese against another group of Malays with Chinese.
There were two Chinese secret societies, but they were both allied with different groups of Malays.
Yes.
So the community was kind of split down the middle. Yeah.
No, it's actually kind of funny because both of them were very similar in a sense, where you had the gihin and the white flags. The white flags predominantly coming from a musical culture and then a religious one, and then you have on the Tua Pekong side the red flags who started from the Boria musical movement, and so it was sort of this very interesting split because you can't say it was a racial thing because you had both similar faces on both sides, But what was interesting was because you had this narrative just on the surface. It may very well have happened, but that was the surface of it. But I don't think people really delve into the fact that in April of that very same year, there was a bidding for the licensing of the opium trade. And Tua Pekong dominated for 9 years. And then that very year, that April, the gihin finally outbid them and monopolized opium for the first time. People get mad at me whenever I refer Frank Herbert's Dune, but for me, I was like, if anything would have influenced Dune, it's situations like this where the spice literally had to flow, or the opium literally had to flow.
Yeah, exactly.
And he based it on, petrol and the Middle East.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, it's exactly like petrol. But this was a bit more devious because, people were shitting it into their veins. Or
He who controls the spice controls the world. You could just replace it with he who controls the oil.
100,000 heroin addicts, But how do you tackle with things like that where in the modern times it's wrong to dope up your employee base or control, but back then, there seems to be
opium revenue farming. It's a huge portion of the revenue.
Yeah. Well, I that's a great question, but I mean, the question is, how do you look at it? If you look at it as a 21st century person with your 24 ideas and attitudes, then of course, so much of it is wrong and disgusting and obscene and whatever. But I think there are 2 points to make. First of all, that is not how they at that time saw it. They had a different set of values and beliefs. And so they would have been judgmental, just like we are judgmental often. But what was okay and what was not okay was defined and different from now. I mean, equally, they might turn around and say, well, look at you guys today. Gaza? What's that all about?
Oh, yeah. Tricky subject, that one.
Why is it still continuing? Yeah.
This is what historians call not to commit the sin of presenteeism.
Present,
Yes.
presentism.
Oh, there's an actual term for
Yes, yes.
presenteeism.
Presentism, yeah.
I thought it was one of those, like, history's bound to repeat itself kind of sayings, but that
Now,
actually sounds a bit
interpreting
more.
history
Yeah.
through modern lenses is
Is
usually wrong.
yeah.
I guess it comes back to fundamentally what it means to be human. I mean, because even while we were all theoretically sitting around the campfire in that ancient time, we were already sharing mythology, stories, paintings on the wall. Do you think it comes down to the very basic reason why humans as a civilization sort of traversed ahead against, I don't know, the other, like Neanderthals or the Denisovans? Sorry, I knew it was something like Denisovans.
He would know. He's actually.
Oh,
you have a master's
I'm a
degree in
biologist,
evolution.
Oh wow! Okay. Oh my God!
Oh,
You're
he's
the
the right
best person to talk about this. Can we
this
delve
is
into
one
it?
of the most scary conversations
Please.
I've ever had.
I would love to be scared because for me, I've always wondered what happened to the other variants of Homo sapiens or the other, because we learned about it. And for me, my love of history started from the modern era, and it kept on going back and back and back. And it always scares me that we only know maybe 5,000, 6,000 years worth of history.
Recorded history.
While everything else was a blank.
You can think in terms of recorded history, meaning there is some, ideally some kind of writing from that time. And then before that time, there are artifacts at least. And then before that time, your fossils only.
Yes.
Oh, wow.
History, that's why it's called prehistory. It doesn't mean there was no history. It was not written history, as that's what it means. Because the Sumerians started writings around 5,000. Before that, you have to figure out from archaeological records.
Yeah, but I mean, going back to your question about you found it kind of scary that these other types of humans died out. I mean, in biology, it's a truism. It's just a throwaway statement that every species is an experiment.
Oh, wow.
So, today, maybe I used to compare it to, with my students, to business enterprises. You set up an enterprise and it starts off small, maybe it's successful and does really, really well. Today I see Apple has just overtaken Microsoft again. But they're constantly having higher market capitals, one than the other, and I mean, so okay, you start in a garage and you become a $3 trillion company, but is it going to stay around forever? Nope. I mean, the East India Company did ever so well for a couple of centuries. And where is it now?
Owned by an Indian?
No,
no, I mean,
it's in the archives, full stop.
Oh, yes, okay.
So, I mean, every species is an experiment. It's a response to a situation. If there's an opportunity, a species can expand and colonize. But when conditions change, if you don't change, then it's end of.
So, So you said, like, okay, the species, they usually respond to something. For example, maybe bees responded to pollinating because the nectar was just so sweet, right? But then here's the scary thing, right? What was humanity's purpose? Because, for example, does the bee know that it's building a beehive because its purpose is to pollinate flowers, right? What are we pollinating? Why are we building these beehives? Because it seems like quite a jump. There's a difference between different fur to sticking microchips in your brain and flying to Mars. Like what were we responding to that we became technologically advanced and spurred faster and faster, especially within the last couple of decades?
Well, I think the question you're asking has got two totally different answers. I mean, one is a kind of a technological, rational, scientific answer. We are progressing, but on a philosophical or a religious level, then why do bees pollinate flowers, or why do we build hives of concrete? Or more properly, what is our purpose here? That's a whole different question.
Oh my.
Yeah. So, I mean, do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah.
You know, there are two different ways to go with that. And I think that maybe this is not the format to
Oh, okay.
to
delve into it. We should get into a documentary because
you know this is going to become a series.
Yes.
I would love to have
well,
you.
we can
Actually, we could.
investigate.
Delve into the extent. Oh, sorry.
On the topic of ecology and all that, one of Mike's specialties is that he incorporates natural history into his history books, and this is something that's more holistic. So, can you tell us a little bit how you came up with this idea to write about Penang Hill? I mean, before it became a UNESCO biosphere, so it must be something significant. Maybe you can share the specialness of Penang Hill.
Sure. That one doesn't have a really strong creation myth, as it were.
Yeah.
When I first came to live in Penang in 2011, I was looking around for things to do, and one of the things was that just then all the street art was taking off. So I used to cycle around Georgetown photographing all the latest murals. But that was fine, but a bit one-dimensional. And so I've always enjoyed climbing mountains, so I started hiking up Penang Hill. And the thing with, I think, most activities is once you get into an activity, you meet people, you find they have similar interests, and you know things just develop from there. So with the Penang Hill book, I started collecting different trails, going this way, going that way, and so on. And I met a guy called Neil, a Scot, and he had an idea for a website. And his idea was, this is back in 2012, 13. He was going to have a website with a map of Penang Hill, and you would have all the trails on it, and you would click on a trail and up would pop a description, pictures, little videos taken along the trail. You know, great idea. But the technology wasn't really ready.
Oh, wow.
Meanwhile, I was thinking, yeah, I'd like to do something about Penang Hill. So I was recording all the hikes I did. And then I started getting into the history of it, the bungalows, the history of the railway and all this kind of stuff. And I don't know how it began, but I just started writing about Penang Hill because it had become an important part of my life. You know, it was a place I used to go to and enjoy exploring.
Yeah.
And it was, you know, going back to the Islands in Malaysia book, it was events happened there. So much stuff has happened on the hill, whether you're talking in fairly recent times, like during the emergency.
Yeah.
You know, there was stuff happening on the hill. People were dying and being murdered and goodness knows what. Or in earlier times, all kinds of stuff were going on up on the hill. So it's Penang Hill in term for a writer. It's a nice discrete topic. You know, you can draw a circle around it and say, okay, this is in and that doesn't really belong, and you can gather the information and see the patterns and so on, and then a couple of years later, you have a book.
Was it? You felt that was a need for a book that synthesizes all of it because all the information was scattered right before it was put together.
Yes, that's certainly true. I think over the last 10, 15 years, the book scene has changed totally. Before, I don't know when, let's say before 2000, there were very few interesting books about the history of Malaysia or Malaya. You know, there were these learned, very serious things, you know,
Analytical history.
But those tend to be the most for me.
Well, yeah, if it whatever turns you on. Yeah.
Well, for me, it's more because I think what scared me the most about history was discovering how malleable it was, right? Where it's based upon interpretation of pieces of notes and data and stuff. So for me, I've always found it interesting because accounting is one of the few things that lies the least, in my honest opinion. Like a ledger for something bought and purchased is there simply, but it also highlights something else. You know, it highlights maybe one person's takeover of a market, which cause and effect. And I think the scary part about it all is that when you sum it down to the minutest numbers, you realize that every moment in history is motivated by the same things. Like it's not as altruistic as or complex or good versus evil as I thought. And I think that was the thing when I woke up about history, where I realized every individual put in the right circumstances is capable of both good and bad deeds. Like for me, if I was heading the East India Company and my quarterly KPI was expansion, would I care as much about the locals?
Yeah.
As opposed to me being a local, I'm like, what are you doing to me? You know?
Exactly. I mean, this is a scary thing, isn't it? I often say to myself, I'm just so grateful I'm not rich. You know, people like Elon Musk or what's his name, and Bill Gates, for example. I'm not saying anything about them as individuals, but when you look at people with who have so much wealth that they can literally have anything they want right now or tomorrow or every day of the week, it's not a tremendous responsibility, I'm thinking so much. It's a terrible trap. Yeah. How do you determine, you know, what is an honourable way to do things? As you say, with your example with the East India Company, if you're the head of the East India Company, and you know you rule a good part of India, and the millions and millions of people, I mean, it's a responsibility, isn't it?
It is.
And you know, with grace, hopefully you will do the right thing.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely accurate. You know, but also at the same time, Penang Hill, we were talking about, right?
Yes.
That in itself was another fork in Penang's historical crossroad, because it could have very well have turned into a casino at one point, right?
Right.
You cannot talk about Penang without East India Company. Even Penang Hill, why was he up
Oh,
there?
yeah,
It's all
yeah.
because of
Oh
that.
no, we've done loads of history.
Yeah.
I think the point you're making about the casino that never was is a great reply to what you were just that point you were just raising. Because what happened is that the state government of the time were well down the road with a massive development of the hill. And it would have happened if it hadn't been for hundreds and hundreds of people here in Penang who said no.
Yeah.
And, you know, they got up off their chairs and away from their busy lives, and they actually did stuff and stopped it in its tracks. So, you know, this is becoming a bit preachy, but you don't have to be the head of the East India Company or Bill Gates to be confronted with difficult questions or important questions. Yeah.
And Penang civil society is very unique in the country. That's one curious coincidence. You know, you also wrote a book about Jerejak.
Yeah.
And there also talks about casinos on Jerejak. The two places you wrote about. Interesting.
Well, I mean, casinos are money makers. It makes sense, you know.
Right.
Yeah. But that's the dichotomy there, right? Which one is the better answer? Because both are trying to solve similar problems, you know. But when it comes down to histories of these different places and stuff like that, like, you know, in the far back, why was it a perfect location for those of the West as opposed to, because I've heard this theory and I want you guys' opinion on it. So apparently the theory was because a lot of the local culture was river based. If you were surrounded by Aboriginal tribes or attacked or raided, you would sail onto a ship down the river to a different part. Hence why a King's River was always part of a royal palace. But when it came to the West, being from where England and the United Kingdom is practically large islands. When they look at islands, culturally they're more comfortable with it as opposed to the river. Do you think that's a thing when it comes to why islands were colonized, like Jerejak or Penang and Singapore?
Well, the reason why Penang was colonized by the Brits was we need to ask Francis Light exactly. Why did you choose Penang?
Yeah.
And why did Raffles choose Singapore? And how come two apparently similar islands, not so far away from each other? Penang initially did pretty well, but then it was just left in the dust by Singapore and its rate of development. I think there are lots and lots of things. But coming back to your point about rivers, I used to, when I hadn't properly thought about it, I used to think, why is it rivers are so kind of important in the history of, say, early Malaya or Borneo, for example? And then you realize it's because there were no roads, for goodness sake. And if you want to go from here to somewhere else, if you want to extract gold, grow crops, trade, whatever, there's only one way, and that's, well, two ways, sorry. There's either up and down the river or along the coast.
Which is chopping with a machete along the way all these vines.
Yeah.
Interesting tidbit. Mike, you remember I got it from the India archives, that sketch by Thomas Forrest, really, of Jerejak in 1785 or 84. In that map, there was also a sketch. They call it the Cra Canal. That mythical thing where you can connect one side to the other. There were instructions saying that you could navigate through all the tributaries in 3 days from Kuala Muda to Patani. It was already there. Yes, but the tributary is right up.
Well, actually, that's interesting because there's there was a trading route across the Isthmus of Kra. And there's also a trading route across Johor, roughly speaking from Muar to Endau.
Yes.
And on some of the early maps of the Malay Peninsula, in fact, the Malay Peninsula comes down, and then, roughly speaking, Johor is a separate island. Yes. Because the people who drew the maps knew there was an Endau River that went in, and they knew there was a Muar River that went in.
Oh my God!
And they, without thinking, they joined the two.
The Malay map making, they tend to exaggerate because it doesn't have to be accurate. They just want to exaggerate the waterways so it navigate. So it doesn't really matter the size. It's like go through here.
Yeah. I mean that puts you on a whole other thing about maps. If you look at a map. And you look at, say, the width of a road, that is totally wrong, because if a road on a map, which is a few millimeters, a couple of millimeters, if it were truly that size, in reality, it
would be huge.
It would be huge. Yeah.
I think that map was in one of the Royal Society's journals. It showed the unusually large canal through. They call it the mythical one through Johor. That map contains something interesting, which I'm going to put in my book about Penang. Because if you look at the very corner, in Jawi script, in Penang, there's an island there. There are only 3 places with names, and the British Library dated it to around 1730. So
1730?
Pucat Muka, Pulau Tikus, and Pulau Pinang.
Oh, snap.
Yeah. So these 3 places already had names in 1730. How they know that? They saw, because they drew the ship's rigging. The British Library estimated it to be around 1730 from the style of the ships. An interesting tidbit.
So Penang was already recognized all the way back there.
Or at least these 3 places they used as navigational marks. The point of that particular map was going through, the other side. The shortcuts.
But here's the thing. I'm
glad.
that...
And there was something called, I think, the Prahu Tarik. They'll drag it across the areas,
across the watershed.
All right.
Just to the next river.
Yeah, no, it's pretty interesting as well because you were telling me about because I see you holding the man who built the castle, right?
We're gonna get to that.
Yeah, we're gonna get to that because the thing is, you were telling me. I remember when we met last time about the castles, how they had like twins. It was built by the same person. Like Penang had a castle, and then
I did. It's more like these Scots, they inspired each
Right,
other.
right,
So
okay.
You have a big house. I want another one too.
because that's pretty interesting as well. Like that's a bit more of like the human element of Penang.
Yeah, I'm bringing this book up because a lot of Mike's book. He has a very scientific mind. After all, he's a scientist. I just like this part here. I read it. In this age of cut and paste, oft repeated myths quickly acquire the status of facts. This is something not just for para history, which is about Kelly's castle. It's probably you heard all kinds of stories about it. It's also happening in Penang. Sometimes often repeated myths and stories become facts. And this is a good antidote is research, proper research.
But wouldn't that be like a good insight to the human psyche? For example, you have reputable, repeatable, documented facts, but sometimes it's much more romantic to believe in the mythology.
I think Carl Sagan says, the demon-infested world is when you're lacking facts, you're going to explain it through demons as well.
Ooh, scary.
Demons solve everything. If something falls, blame the demon.
Yeah. But do you think that maybe comes down to how human civilization survives based on the stories, like the hive mind that propels us? Like, back in the day, how did you tell your son how to hunt? You gave him a fantastical story about a god going into the forest and throwing a spear, maybe,
I think our trajectory, and correct me if I'm wrong, Mike, is humans have something retentive, experience because of writing. That's why we accumulate, and that's how we diverge from all the other creatures.
So you think the written...
This is important, books. Because, if you take any other mammal, they just, other than instinctively, they lose all their knowledge.
Oh, absolutely.
They don't accumulate.
I mean, didn't they do one experiment where they copied one troop of, I don't know if you call them a troop, right? Troop of apes from the beach, played that exact holler to another group of apes in the mountains. They couldn't understand each other. It's like this specific troop of apes, they've had a very specific word for like seashells or water, something they've seen. Is that passing on of knowledge, I guess? Do you think that is what's key rather than bronze, as in like the big gorilla that smashes the rock? Do you think that was the thing that propels any, say an octopus, if they're able to do that, would you think they would be the ones evolving over apes?
I think there is a great story about a group of Japanese scientists who were studying monkeys on an island, and the monkeys would often spend time on the beach. And because the scientists wanted the monkeys to be performing in front of them, they began by feeding them bananas. So, the monkeys come in, the bananas, and they do monkey things. And then, for some reason, they had no bananas one day. Oh, what are we going to do? And they had some corn, sweet corn, individual kernels. I guess it was dried corn. And so they put a pile of it on the beach. I think this story is great because some of the monkeys went up and just kind of grabbed handfuls of corn with sand and kind of ate it and
like, what is this?
And the problem was the sand. And after 2 or 3 days of this, a young female monkey in the group picked up corn, walked into the ocean and released it, and of course the corn floated and the sand sank. And then she ate the corn.
Oh, wow.
And within days it went through the troop. And the transition through the group was younger ones, and then progressively older ones finally catching on to the idea. So it's all about whatever works, isn't it? If you, whatever your situation, if you find a solution, then on the one hand, of course, you will use it, and on the other hand, other people will see it and think, yeah, makes sense.
So how does that make you feel when you have that perspective and understanding, and you come across information about two Scotsmen who build giant castles identical to each other. With that basic knowledge, and you see that two grown Scottish men with money competing in a cut and pace over vast spans of lands, and like what does that mean for human civilization in general when you see that?
I think it's profoundly sad.
That we've always been having this competition. My Ferrari is better than yours since ever.
Come on, guys. Come on, guys. You got nothing better to do.
Because they probably obviously had better things to do. I mean, right? You would think so, right?
What you'd think.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I mean, no, everyone lives their own lives, and why did Kelly Smith build his castle? I mean, there were reasons why he built his castle. When he first went to Perak and was a planter, he had a little wooden bungalow. And on one trip back to Scotland, because of his father's death, he met this lady who he married and brought her back to Malaya, to Perak. And, there is no letter saying this, but she obviously looked at the bungalow and said, there is no way I'm going to live with you in that little wooden house. So, okay, right. And, and then it gets complicated because they're married. So what happens? They're going to have a child. So there's pressure on him to build a nice house. Yeah.
So it's like the age-old trouble of a standard guy with a wife. And
there's always a reason.
If you might be asking, most of your books are about Penang.
Yeah.
This is a little bit...
This one, I blame my wife. She what happened was, I love my wife very much. We were in Ipoh just for a few days relaxing, and she said, let's go to Kelly's castle, which she'd visited a number of years earlier. And I thought, I do not want to go to Kelly's castle. It's a tourist trap. There'll be hundreds of people there.
And it's not even a castle.
And
wow.
And it's not a castle. Yeah. And so, of course, we went. Yes, dear. And it's a brilliant place. The first time I went, it wasn't very crowded. There were a few other people around. There were nice gardens. And, it's the usual thing. You start thinking, why did he build this? And how did he build it? And when did he build it? And there are little signs there telling you some information. But information always makes you think, well, okay, but why and how? And you want to know. You want to know more.
And sometimes the signage, especially around Malaysia, is kind of wanting and questionable information sometimes.
Well, at the end of the day, that also goes into the interesting part about Malaysia in general, where you have competence and incompetence side by side, blatantly out in front. But when you think about the people that came to this part of the world, there is some semblance of brevity that goes into it, because most people tend to die when they were in Penang of malaria or just traveling here. Why do you think these people decided to venture out? How bad was? Because I would love to believe that the only reason...
I think it'd be even more accurate. It's like die early. They die really early.
Why do you think, these type of people, was there like a narrative, a story to recruit those who were unintelligent into a laborious, scurvy-filled lifestyle?
I think you got that wrong. The East India Company, they had to go to the East India College, and they're very, very well trained.
So these were educated young men,
the writers and all that. Otherwise, we wouldn't know about all this. The East India College still exists, by the way, today.
Wow.
They train all the officials.
I think it's fair to say that some people were selected and trained and posted out here, but that's not looking at the individuals who came anyway.
Yes.
And Scotland in the 18th and 19th century was a huge source of young, educated men. So Scotland was exporting education, and these guys were coming here, and why were they coming? Because they thought they were going to do better here than there.
Wow.
Yeah.
The Georgian England was not like in the books. It's quite a grim place. A certain
Right.
if you're
Yeah,
a
they
certain class.
didn't all wear wigs and
Yes.
ride around in coaches.
No, it's
right?
funny because
Yeah.
like sometimes when you read some of the history, the actual history, the archived history, it seems that they're less Hollywood Bretonian with their red jackets, and they're more Blackadder sometimes. You know, they're just like, well, we're here. Oops. You know, but when you put it into the context of like for example, we can say that someone who is a captain or a politician, you know, we can forgive them for doing a bad job, but what if that job affects history as a whole? Because we're talking about sleuths of sometimes erased or changed narratives over time that have lasting effects to modern times. Do you think that's justifiable when somebody goes in and tampers with history, or?
They wouldn't be thinking about it at that time. They just want to make money. That's why they join the company.
Oh yeah, that's true, right? It's all profit driven.
But
They
besides,
don't even think about that. It's just, that's career advancement.
I got a
So,
pretty girl waiting for me. I got to
I
come
mean,
back
you
a
go work
millionaire.
for a
Yeah,
factory, you
right.
work for the army, you just do your job. You don't think like I'm creating an empire. That came later. I mean, these guys here in Penang, they were just interested in naming hills after themselves and building nice houses.
Oh yeah,
That's
of
good
course,
enough.
of course, yeah.
That's kidding, but it is quite different. You know,
Yeah.
they want to make their fortune, so it's worth the risk. You
Yeah.
can get really rich because the salary itself for the East India Company is not the main thing. You can do things called private trading. It means if there's extra capacity on the ship, you can get really rich because you do your own trading and all that's your profit.
So it was the earliest form of like play at my bar for exposure.
Moonlighting on the job. basically.
and it wasn't just the men.
Yeah.
There's a fascinating book called The Fishing Fleet. The Fishing Fleet. And what it's about is this. If you think about it, in colonial times, you had all these young men coming out to Africa, Southeast Asia, wherever, trying to make their fortunes. And they were all men. It was a very male thing. So on the one hand, that meant there were fewer men back at home,
Right.
and equally more spare women. So the fishing fleet was young women who would come out here looking for a husband.
Oh, I thought they were looking for fishes.
This is
No, they were fishing for something
Oh
quite
my
different.
God.
and there's a very good story here, just nearby, just right over there. You know, Mount Olivia.
Yeah.
Okay, beside that was another hill. Raffles brought his sister along and married her off to one of the officials here. So he came with his family.
Yeah.
Right. You see, this was the problem. If you are a young woman and you feel there are no prospects, that means there's no one around you can marry, because women didn't work in those days, or most of them didn't. If there were no prospects, then you would look overseas, just like the young men were doing.
Right.
And the problem was, who could you use to introduce you into a society? You know, you can't just go as a single woman.
Yeah.
You would be, oh, my goodness, who is?
Who's this straight
Yeah.
off the street?
Yeah, straight off the street. You have to, when you arrive, you have to be the the sister of, or the niece of, or whatever. You know, you have to have a connection with a family that's already there, and then they can introduce you to society.
Wow.
And got to remember, Georgian Britain, you need to know people even to get job in the East India Company. So connections.
Yeah, it was all about connections.
And who you know, and a more primitive way of networking.
Yeah, it's networking.
Most human societies are like that. It's very relationship based.
Yeah.
So when it comes to Penang in general, right? Like, what was the community like in the what do you call it? Like in the 17th, 18th, or even early 19th century? Like, what was it like as a normal individual? I mean, you say you've kind of came across various diaries sometimes. You know, we tend to have a picture of what we see in the black and white pages in books, but through these diaries, was there anything out of you were just like, I didn't know Penang was like that?
I think in the very beginning of, as you said, the book scene changed, right?
Yeah.
Because now, you say history is malleable. It's actually it's good, because if it was fixed, there'll be no progress. As I said before, first it started off like a black and white TV.
Yeah.
You do more research, it gets sharper.
Yeah.
Then you have color. Very soon you have 4D.
Yeah.
4K. It's a very scientific process in a way, compared to previously where you have myths and stories.
Yeah.
The modern history is kind of like part of the scientific method. You collect evidence. You cannot be absolutely objective, but it's better than passing along myths and
Well, what I meant was like,
stories.
living in Penang. Did it feel like living in a technologically advanced society of its time, or did it feel like, oh God, what am I doing here? Life was just horrible back. This is my second chance at life,
It wasn't the worst place. A lot of waiting was involved. You don't have steam back then. You just have to wait for the trade winds. Every time there, you're stuck for months. So you have to be very patient to go anywhere. So they were advanced. They could travel around the world. Imagine if I gave you a ship now, I think none of us were able to sail it.
Oh, I barely know how to do it.
It's so
Not.
complicated. Yeah.
Wow.
But there are many. You can't really answer that question if you talk about European. They have European society, and you have the Chinese. Sometimes there's an intersection between the two, and you have the Malays, and there's so many different languages and groups, so you can't really generalize. But I think, Mike, why are you interested mostly in the later part of the 19th century?
I honestly don't know. It's just a time I connect with. Earlier than that, most of the records are official East India Company records, which are, I find dull. They're worthy and important, but to me dull. But from around the 1850s till, let's say, the end of the century, there's a whole lot more stuff. There are personal letters, to friends and so on. There are diaries. There are newspapers of the time. It's just a richer time.
Yes. Speaking of richer, the newspapers at the time is quite different from now. They really go in depth, don't they? I mean, there's an event, they'll put a list of attendees.
Yeah.
You don't see that anymore.
So it was the Wikipedia
They'll
style
describe
of like
in
just
detail.
like here's everything you need to know.
Yeah.
Now we
Yeah,
take video
it-
for granted, but they describe the whole scene. So
Yeah.
and so at the wedding, these are all the attendees, these are the gifts.
Wow.
Yeah.
You better give
But-
a good gift because it goes to the
But
news.
it's also really important because I mean you've just touched on an important point there.
Yeah.
If you read the Penang newspaper from, let's say, the 1840s, it was just 4 pages,
Yes.
and the first page, roughly speaking, would be all adverts.
Yes, yes.
Someone
Auctions,
selling
yeah.
a horse or
Government
whatever.
gazettes.
And then you would get a section where it says, the following ships have arrived, and they have brought news of, maybe of Burma, because the ship called there and has brought newspapers from there. Or there's a ship arrived from Calcutta with news, or from Hong Kong. But the point to appreciate is that until the newspaper arrives from another country, you don't know what's happening there.
Yes,
Wow.
yes, yes.
No radio, no TV,
that's
no
scary.
internet, no electricity.
When I was doing about Mount Erskine, the precursor to
Yeah.
the electric telegraph, you could think about it. They did not know that the War of Napoleon was over. For months. They were still trying to build those things for the war, which already ended. The news took a while to reach.
Well, it's like that Japanese soldier in the
Yes,
Philippines
yes.
who nobody told him the war was over.
30 years he was in the jungle, right? Just like
Right.
people thought he was a ghost. It's like
And when people came and told him, he said, "No, cannot be. The emperor would never surrender. You're lying to me."
that's kind of interesting though, in a sense where you could literally be within your own bubble within a bubble. Like
Fast forward to now, we know everything on the other side of the world.
Yeah.
do we?
Instantly.
Do we?
Yeah.
Yes.
I think that the algorithm and the thing that people have been complaining about, how I perceive it, right, is just an amalgamation of how human civilization actually works, because like people complain about you have your cliques in your algorithm, but when they're always the case, like you said, like you can't be introduced into proper society unless you knew someone. That seems like an early form of gatekeeping or door and password, right? So when you look at things from that lens, where certain values and traits, the technology, the execution may be different, but it could still be applied back then.
I think it's still working here. Look, even this show is called the Circle of Trust.
Oh,
You see, our guests, get the guests of the future guests. It's all circle of trust. I mean, if we randomly approach him, we don't know him. What are the chances of you?
but then the question is, right? Are we the theater or the barking man in the tavern, or are we the court jester? That's the problem.
I think it's just you have to invest relationship. It's a good thing. That's how we become a cohesive society. I mean, not strangers.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
Mike, that's all one question we always ask people. Why Penang? You said
Oh, yeah.
2011. Why?
Okay, right. Came to
When was the
Penang.
first time you heard of this island?
Okay, take the second question first.
Okay.
When did I first come to Penang?
Yes.
It was 1982 on my honeymoon.
Oh, wow.
My wife and I married in Singapore, and what at the time I thought was really romantic. We brought the overnight train to Butterworth.
Oh,
Came over on
12 hours?
Yeah, one of the proper old ferries.
Old school.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, proper old ferries to Penang Island, and we stayed here about 4 or 5 days, and then we went on to Bangkok on the train. Yeah, we went to Batu Ferringhi. Yeah.
And now you're staying there.
Yeah. So first time, and how did I get to hear of it? Why did we come to live in Penang? Lots and lots of reasons. Basically, it's just the most comfortable, friendly, beautiful, tasty in terms of food places. It's just a marvelous place. Give you a simple example. But in Singapore, which was very good to me, towards the end of my time there, I got really irritated because you would have to queue to go into a restaurant. You would even find queues of cars waiting to get into car parks. And that just used to do my brain in. And coming to Penang, where you can drive into town and you can park anywhere on Chulia Street, even double park if you're lucky, and no one will say a word. It's just
It's like way of life.
it's a way of life. Yeah, people. I was talking to a visitor to Penang, but he comes from Finland. I was talking to a visitor yesterday, and he said it had taken him a few days to get into kind of Penang time, but now he was kind of nicely chilling and relaxed. Penang is just a brilliant place. Yeah.
So what was the most interesting thing that you found in Penang throughout your whole...
Ah.
Like, if you had to say one was just that moment where I was like, above all else.
There isn't one. There's just so many different...
Or 2, 3,
There's so many different things. I mean, I can only talk in terms of the things that I enjoy seeing and doing. And I go kayaking around the coast, and you go up little rivers, and you turn a corner in the river, and there's a monitor lizard. I mean, big deal, it's a monitor lizard. But it's the moment when there's that kind of silence in the river, and you turn a corner, and oh yes, and it's just a reminder of the beauty and the reality of the place, or something totally different. I don't know. Yeah, yesterday with this guy from Finland, he hadn't seen shop houses before. And I mean, shop houses, yeah, they're everywhere. But when you look at them and you remember that, why is it called a shop house? Because down below is a shop, and up above, it was a whole family. Goodness knows how many kids. They're just Penang's just stuffed full of things, providing you stop and remember and look.
So the books that you've written are almost like an act of love to a
you
intangible
could say.
location.
Yeah, you could say. Yeah.
As someone who also stayed in Singapore, I can relate to you. I remember I was there.
Is it
the
really
first
that
few
horrible?
days? No, it's not horrible. It's different. It's different.
It's different.
When the
It's a
first
different
few days there, I
solution,
got a
yeah.
rental car. My house was about 300 meters away from the mall.
Yeah.
There was no parking left. An app will even tell you there's no parking left. So you have a car, but there's nowhere to park. I drove back and I walked. And after that, I decided I just cycle around. There's no point having a car.
Yeah, it doesn't seem with that in mind. Yeah, why would you? But
And
then-
But everyone in Singapore wants a car.
That's true.
It's what the 4 or the 5 C's, isn't it? There's a condo, a credit card, a car, and I don't know what.
then
the
it's
others
no
are.
different than a Scotsman building a castle for his wife, isn't it?
I found something
It-
really brilliant, a British invention, still made in London, a
What?
Brompton. So
Oh,
all the
right.
time I was there,
Yeah,
I was
yeah,
using
yeah.
the
Oh, what
foldable
now?
bike.
Brompton, it's a folding bicycle.
Beautiful British design. Yes.
It's funny that in that context, the bicycle would be like, oh, here's like, so you have a bicycle, everybody has a car. Right?
Penang's the diversity in culture and geography. And the geography is, I just celebrated my anniversary, me and my wife.
Yeah.
We went up to Hickory, Dr. Rush. He has all your books there.
Yeah.
And you see, you can go from, ground level. We live in Tanjung Bunga, and just like in half an hour or so, we are up in the
Up on the
hills.
hill, yeah.
It's just the diversity money can't buy.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
yeah.
Yeah, you can't buy that. And also the thing is, one of the things that I genuinely like about, or Penang or Malaysia in general, is the fact that we've mentioned this on many podcasts, is the fact that you have many different demographics who are not forced to give up their identity. Like for me, growing up in the States, it was like you are ethnically something else, but you gotta speak English, you gotta absorb, which is not wrong. There's a certain element of unity or shared history, but here is that weird mesh of you could not talk you don't have to know Bahasa. Like there are so many people who's like, oh, my Bahasa not good, and stuff, and you're just like, in America, but like, you can't speak English, get out of here, But that I don't feel is a weakness as most people portray it as. I think that is the greatest strength, because you're able to accept your neighbor without even understanding your neighbor. Like that distance of like, oh, let them have their space instead of forcing them to conform.
Yeah.
I think that's one of the things that people don't really realize, the power of Penang or Malaysia in general. Just that one element. We have our warts, trust me. We have our warts and bumps and bruises.
It's a different form of multiculturalism. The one in the America one is more assimilation. Eventually, everybody becomes Americanized.
Yeah,
This is why we have this mixed stew. The ingredients are still there.
Yeah,
It's
and you're right. The ingredients are still there. We're not
yeah.
forced to mesh together, and there's many levels of respect.
and
but
we get
yeah.
mee goreng when you mash up all the ingredients.
Oh yeah, like the tiger was saying. Yeah, you get mee goreng where you put it in. No, but-
Finally, we're talking about food.
yes.
I'm sorry, was that the specialty we're going in? Yeah, but food in itself, like I've recently discovered over the past 2 years that they are in itself history books. Like when we were,
Yes, right.
when I was doing this, it started off with a nasi lemak live stream when we were doing it with Peter Yeo, who's he's just an expert on food. So he literally took apart the ingredients.
It's a
of
writer
nasi
for
lemak.
the Michelin.
Oh yeah, sorry. Of course, I was just trying to be very humble about. Yeah, he's a writer for Michelin. I didn't want to make it seem like I knew everybody, but the way he deconstructed nasi lemak, and the way he did it was very beautiful, because he could link it to all these different pathways. Like the sambal, the sauce was because of Portuguese occupation of Malacca, for example. So when it comes to food, do you think that inadvertently, like the ingredients that we use in there, we sort of created a time capsule, an edible time capsule, just by virtue of what we had access to, like fish, salt.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, whatever our situation, wherever we are in the world, then we rely on what has gone before and what is there now.
Yeah.
And yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Pretty interesting, that one. But with the topics that you've chosen in your books, are there any specific reasons why you hop from Penang Hill to castles, or you just go based on what interests you and
Yeah. Basically, what interests me.
at the time?
Yeah.
So you have another book
it-
called Bungalows of Penang Hill. Is it a spin-off or was it planned? Was it a spin-off from Penang Hill Journey Through Time?
Bungalows of Penang Hill is down to Salma Kuhn. A few years ago, we were chatting, and she said, what you really ought to do is a book on the bungalows of Penang Hill. And I thought, nope. Because my initial reaction was, this means I'm going to have to climb all over Penang Hill to photograph a whole series of bungalows, and that doesn't sound very interesting. And of course, it wasn't like that at all, because just like in my very first book, Islands of Malaysia, my running theme was every island has an identity, every island has a story, and it's the same with the bungalows of Penang Hill. Somebody built that bungalow. Who were they, and why did they build it like that? So it's just a giant rabbit hole that you go down and you discover all the. One of the marvelous things for me about the bungalows of Penang Hill is, yes, the people who built them are interesting, but what in a sense is even more interesting today is there's another generation of owners, often not connected in any way with the builders, but they have this feeling of identity and responsibility. They're custodians of history. Yeah, they're very proud of the bungalow. But the ones I've met, it's not a case of I own a bungalow. It's more, yes, I am fortunate to own a bungalow, and what do you think of it? So I don't know how we got onto bungalows of Penang Hill.
It's totally related.
Yeah,
it's all related.
Yeah.
Yes. And you care to explain this? This is totally different from the rest.
What
of
is
your
that?
books.
The best of what?
Very personal.
Okay, this is.
No, read out the title.
In the best of company, postcards from the Hajj.
Care to share with us, Mike?
Okay, I don't want to say a lot about it, but what I will say is, a few years ago I completed my Hajj, and when I went on Hajj, I thought I will keep a diary, because this is something that I'll only do once in my life. It's very significant, and I would like to have a record of it for 10 years, 20 years, whenever, so I can look back and reflect on what happened and my experiences and my thoughts. So I kept a diary, and as I explain in the book, towards the end of our time, I was talking to another Hajj pilgrim, a guy from England, and we were looking at the central mosque in Mecca, and he said this kind of really bizarre thing. He said, "I wonder where my father parked his car." And
okay,
and you're sort of in this very reverential and respectful mood, and this guy who you've met and you're becoming friends with says, "I wonder where my father parked his car." And at first I thought,
rather odd.
Yeah, well, I don't see it. And then I said, "How do you mean?" And he explained how in the 1960s his father, who was a migrant from Pakistan to UK, he and a group of friends decided they wanted to do Hajj. And so what did they do? They bought a couple of cars and they drove through Europe, through the Middle East
to Mecca.
To
Mecca.
And it just kind of, gosh, how audacious. I mean, today you get on a plane and you fly there, and there are stewardesses on the plane, and there are guides on the ground, and there are hotels, and everything is arranged for you. It's all very effortless in that sense. But this guy and his friends said, "No, we want to go," and they drove there. And I thought, this is terrific. And I was asking him about it, asking my friend about his father's experiences. And he said, they wrote a book about it, but it's in Urdu.
Oh, wow.
And I thought, I'd like to read this book. And so I managed to find someone to translate Urdu, who translated the book for me. And it was just something that you can't explain. I felt an identification with these guys and their experiences, and I started reading more accounts by other people. There was a guy just a few years ago, modern times, who walked from Java,
To Mecca.
To Mecca.
Wow.
And I, there are so many things you can say about this sort of thing, but I wanted to try and pull in what it was we all shared.
What would that be?
Read the book.
I could loan you.
I was
could loan
expecting
you.
something really profound, but that was a good segue into the book. But
And Penang was quite a launch spot,
right? Yeah,
launch pad, right?
Yeah,
Towards
of course.
the
Yeah,
pilgrimage.
Penang in the old days was a major gateway.
Wow,
the mosque on Lebo Aceh.
I heard about that.
Yeah,
It was
right.
the second Jeddah, the place where you went to until
Exactly.
1970s.
Yeah.
All right,
yeah.
we almost ended the show. One more topic I think you could share. So, Mike, you've been here as a visitor and now a resident.
Yeah.
Maybe you could share a little how you've found Penang has evolved in the time.
Yeah, how has
you've
it
been here.
evolved?
Phew.
Did we put you on the spot? I'm sorry.
Yeah, you put me on the spot there. The first thing I'd say is I regularly go back to Singapore, maybe once or twice a year, and it's true that if you're away from Singapore for a few months or a year, and you go back, it's totally disorienting because there's that building is gone and there's something new, and there's this kind of change all the time. But by contrast, Penang, yes, I mean there are changes. There are more and more condos, more shopping centres, more traffic. But I think the important thing is, so far at least, Penang is managing to hang on to its identity. Despite the attentions of developers. And it is one of those interesting things, isn't it? It's, there's that expression that the straw that broke the camel's back. We've got the Southern Islands, we've got cable cars on Penang Hill coming. There's all the new roads. So far, Penang is, alive and kicking.
Thankfully.
Let's just hope that the people who make decisions, like all these other people, like the head of the East India Company and Bill Gates and Elon Musk, let's hope in their own specific ways they keep a sense of proportion and importance.
Do you think we will?
Inshallah.
I love that you're a man of faith and you just leave it up to the higher powers to figure out.
The fact that we have a podcast called People of Penang.
Yeah.
Mike, do you think that the people of Penang still have that special thing?
That spark, that...
Yes. Yes. And I think they're pretty successful at converting people to being Penang.
Oh, you're one of
Penangites.
us. I mean,
Yeah. I tell people like Penang's greatest asset are sometimes their women. They go off, marry someone, and they never stay in other countries. This is like they always
bring
come
them
back.
back,
Yeah,
yeah.
they bring
You're
them back.
talking about yourself.
Me and a few other husbands included. It's like, how did we get here? It's like, well,
Yeah. Ask my
Certain
wife.
charm, a certain charm.
yeah, no, but Penang is a wonderful place, and I think that's one of the reasons why I decided to. And I align with you on those different aspects. I know we ask a lot of curveball questions, but I think this podcast, you too, Eugene, is because we appreciate Penang
And its people.
and its people. It's the people, and I love it that you were saying that it's the people within these points of history moving about, and you could read the documents before was all operational budgetary stuff, but the real taste of it is when people are in the mix, writing diaries, building castles to outshow each other. And I love it that the main reason was because the wife didn't want to live in a bungalow, and it's like, oh man, I gotta live in a castle.
And so, Mike, before we part ways, maybe you can give some tips to our audience who want to pursue digging into the past.
Oh yeah, so if I want to do that, how do we do that?
Ouch.
Where do we
Ouch.
even start? It's so mysterious.
Okay. A friend of mine who used to work at USM, and he's retired now. He said to me, "How was it possible to write all of these books?" And he was coming from the perspective of when he was doing his research. You know, there were microfilm readers,
Oh,
and
yes.
you would have to read books and go to libraries, and obviously at the discovery was long and slow and painful, and today discovery is just so easy. You've got to be careful because there's so much nonsense on the internet.
Cut and paste.
Yeah, cut and paste, cut and paste, cut and paste. It's a fact. It must be a fact. But libraries, archives, Google Books. Google Books is an amazing thing. The book I'm working on at the moment, if you just go to Google Books and type in his name and hit return, you get all the books. Well, not all, but loads and loads of books that have his name mentioned. And then you just click on the link and poof, there's the page where it's telling you all about this guy. You know, you can just sit in with a laptop in an easy chair, and you know, like they used to say, the world is your oyster. You can discover anything you want. The one other thing I would say, when I started all of this stuff, I was quite intimidated by the thought of museums and libraries and archives, you know, as being sort of elevated, serious, formal places, you know. And the first few times I approached them, it was kind of, can I come in sort of stuff. But you very, very quickly realize that the people, the staff, the people who work in these places are enthusiasts.
Yep.
Yeah, because you're probably the first person that day.
Yeah, and you say to them, "Can you tell me anything about da-da-da-da?" Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
And you know, it's kind of welcome to my world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think you put that. No, it's funny because when you described that was my exact experience coming in realizing that, for lack of a better word, I'm not saying it in a derogatory. Like, everybody are just history nerds who just want to, what I like to call, nerd vomit, because they don't have the opportunity to do it in their day-to-day lives. They can't go to the movies and be like, "How's your day?" "Well, we uncovered." It's like, okay, you know, now, right? So when you come on board and be like, "I want to find out about this," like, oh,
Yeah.
which
Terrific.
era?
Yeah,
Who do
right.
you want
Yeah.
to know? I know it.
It's like there's no better time to delve into local history now because of these resources like Google Books. Google's trying to digitize every book on earth.
Yeah.
And also the Singapore Library has a wonderful resource online which are the newspapers. Basically all newspapers in the Straits Settlements back to 1830.
Wait, and you can find this online or
Yes,
soon
all
to be?
find it online. It's-
Wow.
yes,
And it's free.
it's free. You know, just about maybe 20 or 30 years ago, you would have to spend a fortune and a lifetime hunting them down.
Yeah,
Now
yeah.
you can do
Yeah.
it.
Yeah, imagine what that would be like
Anyway.
writing your books, man. I mean, like,
It wouldn't be possible. I probably write one book like in 50 years.
Exactly. Yeah.
wow,
You know that Skinner, he was one of the residents here. He wanted to write a history of the Straits Settlements.
Yeah.
He couldn't complete it.
it's because of how fragmented. Yeah, no, it's the little things sometimes we gotta be thankful for. How hard the things that we take for granted now, like film, photography, writing, we take it for granted now. But you know, that's why I'm so glad that you both took the time to be part of this podcast. You know, because now it's documented.
Technology has reduced the entry for many things. I mean, back then, you got to be in the the media to actually have a show. We
Oh
haven't
yeah,
done
yeah,
that.
absolutely, absolutely.
You publish your books.
Right.
Things have changed a lot. Yeah.
I hope it progresses to a
this-
positive way.
It's been a wonderful conversation.
Yeah.
Yes. Anything else?
No, that's it. I just feel like I have a huge existential
Mike-
crisis.
You should do a teaser. Can you just give a hint what you're up to?
Yeah, what are you up to?
Just a hint. Next.
Okay.
Book number 10.
Book number 10 is going to be the last one, I'm pretty sure.
Oh, come on, Mike.
It's a man of Penang, and he's still around.
Whoa.
Savannah Penang, and he's still around. Well,
Yeah, he's standing there.
oh wow.
Stay tuned when
He's
it comes
sta-
out.
He's standing there.
Yes.
We're gonna have him on another podcast
Yes,
for that one.
yes,
I
yes,
want to
yes.
know.
Yes.
You're pretty cheeky with that one.
Okay, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you
Well,
so
it's
much
a
for
really
coming.
wonderful
Thank you.
conversation.
Nice to meet you.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.